This is Fit Amputee powered by James Rock Fitness, and this is episode 12 of my podcast. And today's guest, I've got Anton Raimondo. He was a member of the GB sitting volleyball team in London 2012. So thanks for coming on, Anton.
Great, it's great to be here.
So obviously for the listeners that are listening, how did you come about getting your impairment?
Well, I was on a family holiday. We were traveling in Argentina on motorbikes. My dad, brother, and myself had gone off into the Andes on a 5-day motorcycle trip. We just had a great time in Buenos Aires and a couple of other places around Argentina at the part of our holiday. And we were driving. We were actually on the last day of the trip, and we'd stopped for lunch on the side of a mountain at a little restaurant, and then turned out of the parking lot, went onto the road, came onto the left-hand side of the road and drove around a blind corner, and coming in the opposite direction, right in the same lane, was a pickup truck. And there was just no time to swerve out of the way or stop, and we just went head-on into each other. And the point of impact was just below my knee. So the front bender of the pickup truck actually severed my leg off. And I got flung out to the side and skidded across the road and landed up on my back. And I couldn't actually see what had happened to my body, and I didn't know I'd lost my leg. Unfortunately, there was an ambulance close by. My dad was stopped and came back, and they managed to call the ambulance and picked me up, took me to hospital. I went into coma. About a day and a half later, woke up in hospital and was told my leg was missing. And then went through a huge amount of rehabilitation and repair and so on. And about a year and a half later, I was back up and walking, having had other operations and had to actually be re-amputated. So I landed up being what's called a through left knee amputee. And for a lot of sports, Paralympic sports, through knee is actually also classified as above knee. So I've got a mechanical knee, walk with a prosthetic, also use crutches sometimes. That's how I got my impairment.
And then going from the time you had your accident to progressing through to representing GB in London, how did you go about getting into the sport of sitting volleyball?
Well, I'd always enjoyed sport. I'd always loved team sports. I played a lot when I was growing up in South Africa through university. And at the time I was living in London. And I just wanted to get back into sport because after a year and a half of rehabilitation, I hadn't done much exercise. Certainly no exercise where I was interacting with other people in any major way. And I just missed that camaraderie of a team sport. So I looked around, actually phoned up an organization in London who helps you identify sports in your area. And they pointed out 3 different sports or 3 different clubs within easy distance of where I lived. One was sitting volleyball, which was in a club literally down the road from where I stayed in East London. The other was athletics, and the other one was wheelchair basketball. So I tried the athletics, but I never got much response from them, so I didn't pursue that further. And I started with both sitting volleyball and wheelchair basketball. And I'd never heard of sitting volleyball before. I didn't know what it was. I'd never played volleyball before. But I joined the club, and there was a great bunch of guys. It was a club called East London Lynx. They were fun to play with. What was amazing was they were actually the top club in the country and had a lot of GB players in the club already. So I could see what sort of level I needed to work towards if I wanted to get into the GB team. And I mean, the club was fantastic, very well organized. They took part in European club competitions. So very soon after having joined the club, I was invited to go and take part with the team in a competition in Croatia, and ended up playing some of the top club teams in Europe, which was eye-opening. But the sport bit me, and I got really excited with it and progressed quickly. And then when the GB program really started kicking off in mid to late 2009, I was invited to take part as a member of the squad and trial to see if I could get selected as part of the team. which fortunately I managed to do.
Okay, and then for the people that don't know about sitting volleyball and have possibly not listened to another podcast I did with another athlete involved in the sport, can you explain some of the differences between the game and the one that's in standing volleyball?
It's actually very similar to regular volleyball, indoor volleyball. If you know the sport, you've got 6 players aside, 3 touches before you need to get the ball over. You serve, you pass, you set, you spike. And sitting volleyball is exactly the same. The only difference is that you're playing sitting down with your bum on the ground. There's no wheelchair or prosthetics or any other apparatus. You literally just as you are on the ground. Your bum has to be on the ground when you're touching the ball. The net is lower, so you can still reach over it and spike, and the court is slightly smaller. There are a couple of other small rules, like you're allowed to block a serve and things like that, but otherwise it's pretty much exactly the same. And it's just as fast, if not faster, than regular volleyball, because you've got to move using your arms and then still play the ball. So your reaction times have to be quicker. People are still spiking just as hard. And because the court is smaller, the distances you pass are much shorter as well. So yeah, it's a quick, fun game. Lots of exercise and energy. You have to work well as a team if you're going to do well. So yeah, I really enjoy playing it.
And moving on from that, what was it like from your perspective to compete in your first Paralympics in your home country?
All these events never actually prepared us fully for what it would be like when we were at the games. And it was just incredible. It felt like at the center of the world, the whole of Great Britain, the whole of the world literally were focused on these games. And it was like being in a little bubble. It was obviously an honor to represent Great Britain. I loved every minute of it. It was fantastic. I look back at it now as a dream almost. Yeah, it was brilliant, and obviously we had a great team that we were playing with, and the fact that we could get into the quarterfinals and make history from that point of view, and be the first British volleyball team of any sort, sitting indoor or beach, to actually get into the quarterfinals was groundbreaking. So yeah, lots of good memories from that time.
And then obviously, to put into perspective for the listeners, can you explain obviously because obviously I had the opportunity to play alongside you in that team in the end was, for me, it was 2 years. Can you put into perspective obviously the amount of people we were used to playing in front of for tournaments as opposed to what it was like competing in London?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'd gone traveling around the world to lots of major tournaments in preparation for London 2012. We'd been to multiple European championships, World Cups, continental or intercontinental competitions. We've been to the World Champs in the US. And the World Champs is the biggest competition behind the Paralympics. And even there, the crowds weren't that big. I mean, typically in competitions, you'd have family members and friends coming to support and a couple of curious people. The World Champs, there were some big crowds, particularly for the finals against Iran and Bosnia, and for the home team America. But generally, there's not that many people coming. You're lucky if you get a few hundred. For London, I think we had sold out stadiums, 8,000 to 10,000 people, I think were the capacity. And yeah, if you get 10,000 people stamping their feet and chanting, it makes a lot of noise. So it was pretty cool. It was, we had the best welcome, obviously, of any team. The crowd were completely behind us. I was doing Channel 4 video diaries for Channel 4, who were obviously covering the games. And so I had various interviews with them, particularly around the crowd support, because it was just amazing. I mean, yeah, it's difficult to describe just how much impact the crowd has on how you feel and the performance of your game. especially when they're behind you. I mean, you can block them out obviously when it's negative, but you can really use the crowd support to propel you forward if they're behind you. And London was amazing. They really did get behind us.
And moving on a little bit from London now, obviously you're now based in South Africa and you have set up a program over there. To explain to the listeners, how have you gone about obviously from changing from GB to South Africa? Just to explain before we move on a little bit more. So.
Yeah, well, I planned after London to come down to South Africa for a bit of time and potentially move down here permanently. Okay, sorry, that froze for a moment there. Okay, I'll start again. So, I'd planned to move down to Cape Town in South Africa after London 2012 anyway, for a bit and potentially move here permanently. My partner was very keen to come and live here, so we thought we'd give it a try for 1 or 2 years and see what it was like. And we actually planned to do this big trip where we drove from London down to Cape Town. We bought this old 4x4, kitted it out, and then the two of us jumped in and drove through Europe, crossed into Morocco, and then drove down the west coast of Africa, which was a 5-month journey. And when we got to Cape Town, my partner found work. I was still looking after my business in the UK, but I really wanted to get stuck into something else, and I really missed volleyball. And I was also inspired by the whole experience of London, and the idea of a legacy from London. And the way that I thought I could help contribute to that was by spreading the sport. And I saw a huge opportunity for the sport to be developed here in South Africa. There's a lot of amputees. There's not much infrastructure for disability sport outside of perhaps the main couple, athletics and swimming and maybe wheelchair basketball. But after that, there's not much support for disability sport. And I saw real potential for the development of a South African team as well, which can compete on an international level. And I wanted to help make that happen. I wanted to even be a part of that. So I thought, let's just give it a try. Let's see if I can get a few people together, start forming a team, perhaps help the existing volleyball federation, work with them so that they could build the sport. So I contacted them and introduced myself and said, well, look, I'm happy to meet up with you and perhaps I can give advice. Or, I saw them as the organization which was going to drive it. But I didn't get any response from them. And after months and months, I could see that nothing was going to happen unless I did it myself. So then literally just got, through word of mouth, got a few people together, started a club here in Cape Town, and started expanding it and then doing courses and getting more people involved to help coach and go to other parts of the country to spread the word and do workshops. And finally, beginning of this year, worked with World Paravolley to come out to South Africa, and they ran a set of international courses to certify people in coaching, refereeing, classification. And so we've now also managed to spread it and get other countries in Southern Africa involved, because Southern Africa is probably one of the last regions of the world which didn't have sitting volleyball. So Mozambique and Zimbabwe in particular are now building the sport in their countries as well, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's in some respects things have happened incredibly quickly. In other respects, it feels a little bit slow because I'm kind of anxious for the sport to get established as quickly as possible and get a national team together and all of this. But these things obviously take time, and it's actually now we started in May 2003 with the first club practice here in Cape Town. So it's just about 2.5 years now, which is actually pretty cool. I mean, a lot's happened since then, including now our first national club championship taking place. And that's happening up north in South Africa in a town called Polokwane. And we're expecting 8 teams to be there. So yeah, everyone who tries the sport loves it. It's just about, because I mean, this was a bit of a problem in the UK as well. Not many people know what sitting volleyball is. There's not a lot of publicity around it. So you need a bit of an education process to let people know what the sport is first, get them excited, then get them to try it out, and then for them to stick with it, for the sport to develop. I mean, most of us grow up knowing what football is and cricket and rugby, and you don't need to explain to someone what it is because they've seen it on TV, their friends play it, etc. So, or they've even tried it at school. So it's just easy to get involved in those kind of sports. But sitting volleyball is a whole education process that happens first. And the real challenge here is getting the word out so that people even know that the sport exists, so that they know they can come along and try it out. So that's been one of the challenges. Yeah, what else would you like to know about it?
For obviously, you kind of delved in it a little bit, obviously explaining the South Zonal. Can you explain to the listeners, obviously, how the African continent is divided, and obviously how the African continent works as a whole, obviously with, how would I term it, progression, obviously, for qualification to a Paralympics, say?
Yeah. So every continent in the world, or there's certain zones, continental zones, and the top team from each continent automatically gets a spot into the Paralympics. So you've got a Pan America zone for North and South America. You've got the European zone. You've got an Africa zone, Asia zone. So Africa automatically gets a spot, one spot for men, one spot for women into the Paralympics. And in Rio now, the top team was Egypt for men and Rwanda qualified for women. And then within Africa, you've got subzones. And historically, well, up until quite recently, there's been a Northern African zone and an East Africa zone. And there's been nothing in West Africa or Southern Africa. And in establishing the sport now in South Africa, and then having had those World Paravolley courses and getting other countries involved, we can now actually, we're at the point where we're starting a sub-zone within Southern Africa. And I'm very excited to be working with Zimbabwe, who've agreed to host the first sub-zonal club competition next year in April in Bulawayo. So all the clubs that are established in Southern Africa can enter this competition and compete with each other. So it's fantastic. We've now got a national competition happening in South Africa. We've got a sub-zonal competition happening for clubs in Southern Africa. Then in forming a national team for men or for women or both, you can go to an African Championships, which is also happening next year. And the bidding process for countries is about to happen for that. So we intend to send teams to this competition. And then from there, you can go to the World Championships. And if you're good enough within your zone, so in our case, Africa, we could then perhaps even qualify for the Paralympics. So there's lots of competitions that one can take part in. There's lots to work towards. There's a huge progression path to get to the Paralympics. I think it's important to recognize that it is highly competitive. And certainly for a country like South Africa, which is just starting with the sport, it will be a long journey to try and even qualify for the Paralympics. Egypt, which is the best men's team in Africa, just won bronze in Rio. And, you know, to be able to compete and get to a position where you're contending even for a bronze medal is incredibly hard and takes, well, some people believe it's almost an 8-year program minimum to be able to get to a point where you can get close to contending for any medal. So yeah, it's a long-term program, but it's very exciting to be a part of it and help drive it forward.
And then obviously taking a step back and putting your GB hat back on, How do you see I'll word this differently. Obviously, with your GB hat on, how do you see the British programme has done since London, in your opinion?
Well, I think the GB program got a big knock just after London because they were deciding the funding rounds, and UK Sport decided to cut funding to volleyball and basketball, and it wasn't just the sitting program; it was the beach program and the indoor program for volleyball as well that got their funding cut, and they'd basically taken a strategic decision to pull back on funding big team sports, or some big team sports, which could only win them one medal but took a lot of funding, to funding more individual athletes and sports for individuals where they could win perhaps multiple medals with much less funding. And I think that strategy has proven correct. I mean, we've obviously seen now how successful GB's been both in the Olympics and Paralympics in Rio. So hats off to them for those hard decisions. But obviously, it's difficult for the GB program because the funding was cut, and sport, at elite level sport, requires players to be going to competitions, not just for the experience, but to even get the points to qualify for the next level of competition, to qualify for, the entry spots into Paralympics and so on. So, it's difficult. I think that was one of the critical factors which meant the program didn't progress further. There were other reasons as well. I know they're trying to build the program again now in preparation for Tokyo. So fingers crossed that they build it further. And I know they're on a big recruiting drive now at the moment as well. So hopefully they can get more people in. And it'll be fantastic to see the sport grow.
And then to move off that topic and obviously onto a different one. Obviously, I saw that you were lucky enough to go to this Paralympics just gone in Rio. What was that experience like? And obviously the role you played in that.
I was invited by World Paravolley to be the official reporter just for these games. I've done a lot of media work here in South Africa to build awareness around the sport here, and done a lot of reporting, article writing, social media, etc. So they were keen that I did some of that work for them in Rio, and I was extremely fortunate. It was fantastic to be part of the team there. I worked well with a team of 4, essentially. It was myself, a reporter, the marketing director, and general manager working together to make this happen. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work. We were up. Matches started. We need to be on court at 9 o'clock, which doesn't sound too early, but then we were working until sort of 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning to finish off reports before going home. So doing that day in, day out was hard work, but it was absolutely fantastic to be part of the experience again, and it reminded me so much of the times in London. And because I knew a lot of the players or the teams, and I got to know some of the coaches, it felt like I was following their personal journeys. And sometimes these journeys crisscrossed when teams were competing against each other. But it was fantastic. There were all these stories coming out, and I mean, one in particular which went huge around the world was the battle between Iran and Bosnia. I don't know if some of your listeners had watched the games from London, but Iran had been the gold medal favourite. Bosnia came in, snatched the medal from them in London. The question was now who was going to win again in Rio. So Iran worked out that they needed to come up with a solution. They found this 2.46 meter high giant and brought him into the team, trained him up in preparation for Rio. But no one else, except for a few players who played against him in China, knew about him. And so when he arrived in London and arrived in Rio and played in the preliminary round matches, he created this sensation. He was only brought on for half a set, but the crowd went crazy, and the few media that were there obviously got some photos and stuff. I took some video of him. I got a video of him acing, and I put it up on social media, and it just went viral immediately. The media tried to interview him after the match, but they denied any interviews. And so there was this frenzy of like trying to get information from him. And the next day, the New York Times ran a front page article in the sports section, and it went viral around the world. Like every single newspaper, even in like New Zealand, was writing about him. So it was fantastic exposure for the sport. And of course, then all the rest of the media wanted more information on him, and were coming to us or to the matches to now see. And we ended up having to they organized a press conference for him with the coach and the captain of the team, and he basically became this overnight sensation. And it was fantastic. It promoted the sport. It showed what an incredible athlete he was, obviously what a height difference made in the sport. And yeah, I mean, from then on, his matches were just Iran's matches were completely packed out. So yeah, being a part of these kind of experiences and seeing how they unfold and sharing some of this media and exposure with the rest of the world was really rewarding and fun at the same time. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, the experience of Rio itself, I mean, you'll remember we didn't actually go to the opening ceremony for London because we were denied the opportunity because we had to be 100% ready for our first match, which I think was the day after, or the second day after the opening ceremony. So the idea of us walking around a stadium or partying in any way wasn't a good idea. But now I got to go to the opening ceremony and see what it was like and feel that experience. So on one hand, I was reliving some of the London experiences. On the other hand, creating new ones, which was fantastic.
And it's something we discussed off air. Can you explain to the listeners, obviously, the issue with the number of teams that were in London as opposed to what was the case in Rio, and what was the reasons to that being the case?
So in London, there were 10 teams taking part in the Paralympics, and amazingly, 3 African teams managed to qualify. And one of the reasons for that was that an additional spot had been granted to promote the sport in sub-Saharan Africa. So Rwanda managed to win that spot and came through. The other reason being that Egypt had won a qualifying slot through the World Championships rather than through their zonal competition. So out of the 10 teams, three were African, which was brilliant for the African continent. However, they made a decision to reduce the number of slots from 10 down to 8 for Rio, for the men. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was purely due to logistics and funding. I mean, to build accommodation or house a full squad plus all the staff for a team sport is a lot of extra money for logistics and so on. And there's a lot of sports competing for these slots to actually compete at Paralympics. So every cycle, sports bid to get into the games to be represented. And I think by reducing from 10 to 8, they either saved costs or they gave opportunities to other sports to come in. So now it's even more competitive to get in. I mean, Rio was fantastic. The level of the volleyball has improved since London. And yeah, you get to watch some incredible skill and team play when you watch these games. So does that answer your question, or was something else
you obviously said about off air, obviously you said the African countries were given a special dispensation or something along those lines as to why there was so many in London, and that wasn't the case.
So as I said, there were those three managed to get in for London, particularly because Egypt was so good that they qualified through the World Championships rather than through the zonal spot. So that allowed another place available in Africa, and Morocco won that spot. And then they'd also created this additional spot as a once-off dispensation for promoting the sport in sub-Saharan Africa, and Rwanda had won that spot. So it was a fantastic time for Africa in sitting volleyball. In Rio, there was only one African country for men, and that was Egypt, because they qualified through the zonal spot, which is what normally happens. So, yeah, it was a bit of an exception for London. But this is how the sport normally works. Is you qualify, you normally have, or Africa normally has one country qualifying through its zonal spot for men and one for women.
Okay. And then, obviously, going forward now for you personally, what is on the horizon, or you're not totally sure, obviously, related with the sitting volleyball, what would you like the future to hold?
Well, I'm working really hard in South Africa to build the program up, both to expand the sport, so there's more clubs developing. So, for instance, the Limpopo province in South Africa earlier this year had their first league. You know, they had a full-on league running for 6 months, with between 6 and 8 teams taking part, which was fantastic after having started the sport so recently, that you've actually got a province running such a big league. So one intention is to get that spread out to other provinces. The other intention is to form a national team, or at least one national team, either for men or for women, or perhaps both, and to now start competing in these bigger tournaments like the Africa Championships. I'm also doing work with the sub-zone, as I mentioned, to promote the sport in other countries, and encourage them to start teams and to have these sub-zonal competitions, which we're now doing. There may possibly be work as well going forward for World Paravolley. We'll see how that evolves. So I'm quite heavily involved in the sport and sport development. I'm also coaching at the moment I'm coaching our Cape Town club. We hope to win the national championships later this year. So who knows? You know, there's a lot of work to be done.
So I think we'll wrap the podcast up there. So if people wanted to get involved in sitting volleyball, either in South Africa or previously you were competing with GB, how would they go about finding out that information? Do you have a Facebook group or something like that?
Well, if you're in South Africa, go onto Facebook and do a search for Paravolley South Africa. We've got a Facebook page which has all the latest information and news about it and contact details and so on. You can find out what's going on. It's also a good way to connect into Southern Africa. I can certainly help you if you're in Zimbabwe or Mozambique as well and you want to join the sport there. If you're in the United Kingdom, Volleyball England have a great web page which has a lot of information on sitting volleyball. So just Google Volleyball England and sitting volleyball and it'll come up and you can find all the information you want there.
And then for you personally, if anybody wanted to ask you questions along the lines of sitting volleyball, obviously about you in general, what's the best platform to get in contact with you?
You're welcome to come onto the Facebook page, and if you message me through there, I'll get those messages. If you want, you can also get in contact with me via Twitter. I'm a bit reluctant to put out my email address on a public platform, but you're welcome to come through via Facebook or Twitter. My handle on Twitter is Anton17SA.
Okay. So can you spell that out for people just in case they get the name wrong?
Yeah, it's Anton, then the numbers 17 and the letters SA.
Okay. So I think that's all from me. So thanks again for taking out your time from a busy schedule. It's much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
No worry. So thanks again, Anton. For anybody that's listening, this podcast will be aired every Thursday. So until then, I will see you.